The first time I met him, I never imagined he would one day become both my greatest joy and my deepest ache. But love has a way of sneaking into the spaces you never thought to guard, and he did just that. It was an ordinary evening, the kind of night when the world feels quiet and soft, when the city lights hum gently in the distance and the air holds just enough warmth to make you want to linger outside. I was sitting alone at a small cafe near the corner of the street, my journal open, pen resting against my fingertips, when he walked in. He wasn't extraordinary in a way that shouted for attention, but there was something in his presence that pulled the air tighter, as if even the walls knew he had arrived. His dark hair fell slightly into his eyes, his jaw defined yet softened by the faintest smile tugging at his lips, and when he looked up and caught me staring, I felt something shift inside me. A flicker, a spark, the smallest hint of something that would one day burn me alive. He ordered his coffee, and instead of choosing any of the empty tables scattered around the room, he walked straight to mine, asking with a confidence that was both casual and disarming, "Mind if I sit here?" I nodded. Though my heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure he could hear it. We began to talk, at first about little things, about the book on the table between us, about the way the rain had just started tapping against the windows, about the fact that neither of us liked sugar in our coffee. But soon the conversation began to unravel into something deeper. He told me about the places he wanted to see, the dreams he carried quietly in his chest, and I found myself telling him secrets I hadn't even spoken aloud to myself. It was easy, too easy, the way our words folded into each other, the way silence between us felt comfortable rather than awkward. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and before I knew it, he was part of my world in a way that felt inevitable. We would walk down streets at night when the city was asleep, the two of us laughing so hard our voices echoed against the empty buildings. We would sit under the stars and talk about everything and nothing, his hand brushing mine in those quiet pauses, until finally one night he stopped pretending it was accidental and laced his fingers through mine. I remember the way his thumb traced circles on my skin, how he whispered that he wasn't sure when it happened, but somehow I had become the best part of his life. And in that moment, I realized I felt the same. Our love was not loud, not the kind that demanded to be noticed, but it was deep, running like an underground river, steady and unshakable. He would come over late at night just to sit with me, just to hear my voice, just to fall asleep with his arm draped over my waist. There were moments of pure tenderness, like the way he kissed the top of my head when he thought I was asleep, or the way he'd bring me flowers, not roses or lilies, but wild ones he'd picked on the way to see me. There were moments of fire, too, the kind of kisses that left us both breathless, the kind of embraces that blurred the line between where he ended and I began. He saw me in ways no one ever had, peeling back the layers of who I pretended to be and holding the raw, vulnerable truth without flinching. I thought it would last forever. I thought we were unbreakable, untouchable, because how could something that felt so right ever fade? But love, no matter how deep, is fragile when met with silence, with unspoken fears, with the weight of things left unsaid. And though I didn't know it then, the cracks had already begun to form, invisible hairline fractures that would one day split us wide open. At first, the changes were so small that I almost convinced myself they weren't real. It was in the way his laugh didn't reach his eyes sometimes, how his gaze would drift into places I couldn't follow, how his hands would tighten around mine as if holding onto something slipping away. I noticed, of course I did, but I told myself he was tired, that the world was weighing heavier on him than usual. I wanted to believe that our love, this quiet but consuming bond between us, was stronger than anything outside it. But love, I would learn, doesn't vanish all at once. It frays, it unravels thread by thread, until one day you wake up and realize you are holding on to something that is no longer whole. The nights that once belonged to us grew quieter, not in the peaceful way they used to be, but in a silence that felt sharp, suffocating. He still came over, but sometimes he would stare at his phone longer than he looked at me, his thumb scrolling through messages he wouldn't explain. When I asked if something was wrong, he would smile, too quickly, too practiced, and say, "Everything's fine." But his voice betrayed him, a thin crack at the edges, like glass straining under pressure. I wanted to reach across the space between us, to tear down whatever wall he was building, but part of me was terrified. Terrified that if I pushed too hard, I would discover a truth I wasn't ready to face. There were arguments, too, ones that seemed to spark out of nowhere. He would raise his voice, then immediately look regretful, pulling me close as if the sound itself had wounded me. I would cry silently after he left, wondering why the boy who once held me like I was fragile glass now seemed to shatter me with his words. And yet, every time he looked at me with that softness, every time his lips brushed mine, I forgave him. Because love makes fools of us, doesn't it? It makes us hold on tighter even as we're slipping through someone's fingers. I remember one night vividly. We were sitting on the old wooden bench near the river where we used to talk for hours. The air smelled of rain, the water shimmered under the pale moonlight, and everything should have felt familiar, safe. But he was distant, his shoulders tense, his eyes fixed on the horizon instead of me. "You're quiet," I whispered, trying to draw him back to me, to remind him of who we were. He turned to me then, and there was such sadness in his eyes it felt like the world cracked open. "Sometimes," he said softly, "I don't know if love is enough." Those words struck me like a blade. I wanted to scream, to beg him to take them back, to tell him that love was everything, that love was all we had, all we needed. Instead, I just sat there, frozen, my hands slipping from his. He looked away before I could answer, as if the conversation was already over, as if he had already made up his mind about something he couldn't bring himself to say. That was the first time I felt the ground beneath us trembling, the first time I realized that maybe the love I thought was invincible could, in fact, break. The following days were a blur of hope and dread. Some moments he was the boy I fell in love with, pressing kisses against my neck, whispering promises into my hair. Other times he was a stranger, distracted, unreachable, his silence louder than any words he could have spoken. I felt myself sinking into darkness, torn between holding on tighter and preparing myself to let go. I started questioning everything. Was I enough for him? Was I the reason for his distance? Had I failed at loving him the way he needed to be loved? I wanted to ask, to demand answers, but fear tied my tongue. So instead, I loved him harder. I held him closer. I kissed him longer. I thought if I poured enough of myself into him, I could keep him from slipping away. But deep down, I knew love isn't about holding tighter. Love is about trust, and trust is fragile when someone is already halfway out the door. And yet, despite the storm that was building, I clung to him. Because losing him wasn't something I could even begin to imagine. At least, not yet. The morning he left is burned into me in a way that still makes my chest tighten when I think of it. The air felt heavy even before I opened my eyes, as though the world already knew what I didn't. I woke to the sound of rain tapping against the window, soft but relentless, the kind of rain that feels like morning. I reached across the bed, expecting the warmth of him beside me, but my hand found only the cool emptiness of sheets. He was already awake, already moving through the motions of something final. I found him in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands tangled in his hair. A suitcase sat beside him, its zipper closed, its weight heavier than I could bear to look at. For a moment, I froze in the doorway, unable to move, unable to breathe. Some part of me hoped it was a nightmare, that if I blinked hard enough, he'd laugh and pull me into his arms and the suitcase would vanish. But he didn't laugh. He didn't look up. And the silence between us felt like a chasm. "You're leaving?" My voice broke around the words, fragile and trembling, barely more than a whisper. He lifted his head then, and the look in his eyes destroyed me. It wasn't anger, it wasn't indifference. It was pain, raw, consuming pain, and that hurt more than anything else. Because it meant he loved me still, but he was walking away anyway. "I can't," his voice cracked, and he swallowed hard before trying again. "I can't stay, not like this. We're breaking each other, and I don't know how to fix it." My heart thrashed in my chest. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to beg him not to do this. "We can fix it," I cried, moving closer, reaching for his hands. We can talk, we can fight, we can break and rebuild, just don't leave me. His hands closed around mine, desperate, almost crushing, as if he wanted to hold on as much as I did. His forehead pressed against mine, and I felt his tears hot against my skin. "I love you," he whispered, voice ragged. "God, I love you so much. But love isn't enough anymore. Not for me. Not the way I thought it would be." Those words ripped through me, leaving wounds I didn't know how to stop from bleeding. Love wasn't enough. The very thing I had built my entire world upon, the one thing I thought was unshakable, was suddenly fragile, breakable, not enough. When he stood, I felt my knees weaken. He lifted the suitcase with one hand, his other hand lingering in mine until the very last second, until the space between our palms was all that was left of us. I followed him to the door, each step like walking into my own undoing. "Please," I whispered one last time, my voice shredded and raw. "Don't leave me." He paused at the doorway, his back to me, his shoulders shaking. And for a fleeting second, I thought he might turn around, thought he might drop the suitcase and fall back into me, thought love might still win. But he didn't. He stepped out into the rain, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me in the silence of a home that no longer felt like mine. I collapsed against the door, sliding to the floor as sobs ripped through me. The rain outside blurred the world, matching the blur of tears streaming down my face. Everything smelled like him, everything looked like him, everything hurt because of him. I pressed my hand against the wood of the door, as though I could still feel him on the other side, as though the warmth of my palm could pull him back. But the truth was clear, cold, and merciless. He was gone. That night, the bed felt like an ocean, wide and empty, swallowing me whole. I lay awake, clutching the pillow he had once slept on, breathing in the fading traces of a scent, afraid of the moment when even that would disappear. Every memory replayed in my mind like a cruel movie. The first time he kissed me, the way he whispered my name like it was sacred, the way he looked at me as though I was the only person in the world. And now he had chosen to walk away, taking with him the very part of me I didn't know how to live without. I thought I had known heartbreak before. But heartbreak doesn't truly exist until the day the person who owns your heart decides they can no longer carry it. The days after he left blurred into one another like smeared ink on a page, each one heavy, hollow, and unbearable. I wandered through the apartment like a ghost, haunted by the shadows of a life that was no longer mine. His jacket still hung on the back of the chair. His mug still sat on the kitchen counter, a faint trace of coffee at the bottom. I couldn't bring myself to touch anything, as though moving it would make his absence more real. Every night, I lay awake with my phone in my hand, staring at the screen, waiting for his name to light it up. Sometimes I typed messages I never sent. "I miss you. Please come back. I can't do this without you." But the words stayed trapped, suffocating in silence, because I was too afraid he wouldn't answer. The world moved on without him, but I couldn't. His absence wasn't just a void, it was a wound, deep and unhealing. I thought of him in everything I did. When I pour myself tea, I remembered how he liked his with too much sugar. When I passed the bookstore we used to visit, I saw him standing in the aisle, head tilted as he read the back of a novel. Even the rain made me ache, because it reminded me of the day he left, the way his shoulders disappeared into the gray drizzle, the way the sound of the door closing echoed like thunder inside me. At first, I told myself I was angry. I told myself I should hate him for leaving me like that, for tearing my heart apart without warning. But hate never came. Only love, bruised, broken, desperate love. The kind of love that doesn't vanish just because the person you gave it to walked away. It was in the quiet moments, late at night when the world was asleep, that the truth pressed down hardest. I needed him. Not in the fragile, fleeting way I once thought. Not because he made me laugh, not because he kissed me like I was the only girl in the world, not because he filled the empty spaces in my days. I needed him because he was the rhythm of my life, the center of my gravity, the pulse in my chest I hadn't realized I depended on. I tried to distract myself, friends, work, endless hours spent scrolling through meaningless feeds, but nothing pierced the hollow ache. Even laughter felt strange, like it didn't belong to me anymore. My friends told me I would heal, that time would smooth the edges of the pain. But deep down, I knew time could not erase him, because he wasn't just someone I loved. He was the person who had taught me what love meant. One evening, weeks later, I found myself walking by the river where we had once spent countless nights together. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of winter, and the water rippled with silver reflections of city lights. I sat on the bench we used to claim as ours, tracing the grooves of the wood with trembling fingers, and for the first time, I allowed myself to truly feel it all. The love, the loss, the unbearable truth of how much he still lived inside me. I whispered his name into the wind, as though the night itself might carry it to him. My chest tightened, my throat ached, but my voice was steady when I admitted the words that had lived inside me since the moment he walked out the door. I need you. I always will. Tears blurred my vision, but in some strange way, they brought clarity. I realized that needing him wasn't weakness. It was the purest truth of who I was. He had become part of me in a way I couldn't untangle, and maybe I didn't want to. Maybe love wasn't about holding on at any cost, but about acknowledging the ways it shapes you, even when it breaks you. I didn't know if he would ever come back. I didn't know if our story had ended the moment he walked into the rain. But I knew this. Loving him, needing him, was not something I could undo. It was carved into me, deeper than scars, brighter than memory. And as I sat there beneath the dark sky, the river whispering softly beside me, I felt the echo of him everywhere, in the chill of the air, in the trembling of my hands, in the beat of my heart that refused to let go. Because the day he left, I thought I had lost him. But in truth, that was the day I discovered just how much of me belonged to him, and always would.